Welcome everybody to another edition of Think with a Drink. This is the weekly web show brought to you by the ARIES Foundation of Financial Education. And this week's show is a little different. So this is Knowledge is Power, how you can retire early. Specifically, we're talking about a movement that is called FIRE. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. So this is all about sort of the FIRE movement, or more some of the ideas of it. Next slide. So a quick overview, because there's a lot there. We'll go through the ins and outs of FIRE, what it means, the different ways it works, the different types of movement that are involved, and then sort of talk about some of the considerations that go along with that, Craig,
okay.
which is, what can or what may not work or go right when we're dealing with the concept of trying to retire early.
Right, yeah, I mean, retiring early sounds like a lot of fun, but the preparation for that may not be as fun as you think.
Correct. And then we'll have some key takeaways at the end. Next slide. So we told you that Think with a Drink is brought to you by the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. You can find us on the web, ariesfoundation.org. Our mission is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money. Because whether you realize it or not, you are in a relationship with money. And just like every other personal relationship that you have, there are behaviors and triggers that can cause us to act certainly a little irrationally sometimes when it comes to dealing with our money. That's all myself, Craig, the rest of the ARIES team tries to do is take some of that emotion out of the equation. My name is Tom Alessi. I am the president of the ARIES Foundation. I've been in financial services for 24 years. I'm an investment advisor. That means I act as a fiduciary whenever I'm giving guidance or advice to any of my clients. I want to bring my vice president. Craig, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Craig Richardson. I'm the vice president of the ARIES Foundation. I've been in financial services a little over 20 years now, and I specialize in working with families and individuals to help them define their financial goals and have a better relationship with their money.
Next slide. So we call this Think with a Drink. And the reason we do that is that we're trying to take financial money matters, some of that can be a little bit overwhelming, a little bit intimidating for some folks, and make it more casual, make it more relaxed, and we hope maybe a little fun. But, you can judge for that.
It's an awful good excuse to have a cold beer, right?
And we can't think of a better way to do it than if we have something cold to sip on. So for this week's episode, we are sipping what is known as Canal Street. I believe this is out of the Grey Sail folks down in Rhode Island. It's called a crushable ale. Now, I didn't know that was a category of beer, but it is very light, less than 5% on the ABV, which is the alcohol content. Certainly for summer sipping, summer refreshment, this is definitely something that you can have while you're kicking back at the beach, at the lake, after you cut the grass, whatever the case may be.
And do you take the can and crush it on your head after? Is that why it's a crushable ale?
I don't know about that one.
No.
I don't think so. But anyway,
I'll let you try later.
Skol.
Skol. This is light and refreshing.
Okay, so the quote there is from somebody, part of one of the people who were involved in the early days of the FIRE movement. Scott Rikens actually wrote a book on it. And the quote is, "We are reminded that any frugality that causes stress and harm to our lives does not qualify as a principle of FIRE." And so for Craig and I, the idea, the concept is always about finding balance, right? So whether we're talking about, trying to do all the things to retire early, as Craig said, some of those steps and things that we're going to go through with that, or we're just trying to make sure that we have enough for now and in the future, that's what really matters. And the whole idea is trying to make sure and use some of the concepts, some of these principles that are in the FIRE movement, we think everybody can participate in.
Yeah, you can take some away from what we're going to be talking about today. Absolutely, and apply it.
Next slide. All right, so FIRE. FIRE as, the definition, right, it really comes from this whole idea of that I'm going to retire early, and that means something different to everybody. But the ultimate goal here is that you don't need to work, that you only, because most of us are working to survive. That's where FIRE came from. It was like, I'm working to survive instead of just that I want to, because I enjoy myself.
Yeah, a lot of times people think financial independence means I won the lottery and I'm a multimillionaire. That's not necessarily the case. What it really is about living within your means in a way that's satisfying to you. That's financial independence. You're not worried about your money. You're worried about the experiences, or what you're doing with your life.
Right.
And that finance is not the stressor or the main stressor.
Correct. And one of the ways that you do that is through the idea of being able to have, whether that's passive income or whether that's some sort of other type, and we talked about this, like you can look us up on the web or look us up in new TV channels for No Pension, No Problem, which sort of fits right with that. Generating some sort of an income stream that my money's working for me, I don't have to work anymore.
Absolutely. And the other way too, like I said, to talk about frugality is, do I necessarily need to live someplace expensive? Like we did a lot of episodes over, places to retire, alternative places to retire that were far less expensive than even in the United States, alternatives. So looking at it from that perspective.
I think what happened for a lot with certainly with the pandemic was you had a lot of people who were like, I'm done with this. I want to get out early. I don't, the movement was always, you had this conversation about Social Security and going later and later, and it seems to be now more earlier and earlier.
Well, I think people it was a forced sabbatical. You had to take one whether you wanted to or not. And I think when people in that downtime started saying, do I really want to go back to that traffic, that rat race, that thing I was just programmed in my mind I had to do. And so now you're seeing more people working remotely. You're seeing them move into more remote places because they can work remotely. So you're just seeing a whole different shift of, now I want to live my life, not work to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Next slide.
Or live to work. I'm sorry, I had it backwards.
Right. So, so here's the thing, and this is sort of where it comes through. The industry, our industry, financial services, will tell you that you should be saving somewhere between 10 to 15% of your money. That's sort of the marker, it's sort of the goal that gets put out there for everybody. That's about 10 to 15%. What FIRE says is that you should be putting away somewhere between 50 to 75% of your money, of your earnings on an annual basis towards building the retirement funding. Between however you're doing it, wherever you're doing it. But so understand, normal target about 10 to 15, FIRE preaches 50 to 75%.
Right, and let's be realistic. For a lot of people, that's going to be an impossible goal at the moment. And some people are just living paycheck to paycheck. But once again, it's about thinking, how much could I save? Or what am I spending money on that maybe I don't need to be spending money on that I could be putting into my savings? So don't think that when we're giving you this is the guide. It's, this is the radical extreme of trying to get out of early. But somewhere, like Tom said earlier, somewhere in the middle, there are some things you can pull away from this to get yourself out a little bit earlier, maybe.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, you can look up one of our previous episodes where we talked in the No Pension, No Problem, where we specifically talked about the 4% rule. And just to sort of, real quick brush it, a high overview, 4% rule just says, whatever I've got in my pile of money, no matter where my assets are, I'm drawing 4% a year to live on. So if you had $1 million, that would be $40,000 a year that I would be living on. FIRE builds right in with that. In fact, FIRE does sort of, as we talked about in that episode, that marker becomes at about 3.5, somewhere in that range. Because again, remember, if I'm retiring at 55 or 60, we're talking about 30 years, 35, 40 years in retirement.
Right, but you also got to look at, what job do you have now? I mean, if I'm making $150,000 a year and I'm putting away 50 or 75%, that's one thing. If I'm making $50,000 a year, well, that's a whole different animal. So you really got to look at your own situation when it comes to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we said that, for some folks, there are principles, as Craig mentioned, and concepts in here that can certainly be used, utilized, followed, and one of them just is being a little bit more aggressive with our saving, whatever we're doing as far as that sort of realm and what we're thinking about.
Yeah, or even more or less, getting more value out of what you are doing. right? Sometimes we don't, like convenience, we pay for convenience, right? Or do it yourself. People try to do more do it yourself because you save a little money doing things yourself. So it's about, can I get the same value for less money? And even like, looking at people's 401, how many people we talked to with their 401k who aren't putting enough to get the full match?
Right.
You're like giving them away money, right?
The different types of FIRE, right? So the different types of FIRE that are there. So you have early, and I'm just going to go through them real quick: lean, barista, and other versions. So the early is what the whole FIRE movement is about, right? I'm trying to get out early, and I am going to, if typical retirement is 65, my target is going to be 62 or 60, that type of thing. I'm going to retire years earlier than I had originally targeted. Lean is I'm doing that 75% thing, because I am going to shut down or constrict my spending now so I can be saving more, but also be frugal as I go forward. Not only now, but in my retirement years as well, because it's, as you said, I'm able to then live on less, so my money will go longer.
Right.
Barista talks about the idea that, in one of the things, and we'll talk about this when we get to some of the trip ups here, is that if you're single and you retire at 55 or 58 or 60, you don't have health insurance. You can't get health insurance. Medicaid doesn't kick in until you're 65. So you've got to have some way to pay for that. And what FIRE Barista talks about is just getting that gig, that job, wherever it is, that you can cover your health insurance or some benefits. You're getting a little bit of money, but I'm not really working. I'm not stressing like I was. I'm not putting in the 50, 60 hours grind at my job, but I'm doing something that's kind of fun. The idea is, hey, I retired to somewhere, wherever that place is, like Craig mentioned, wherever it is in the world that you wanted to retire, and you became a barista just to get the benefits.
Well, and the other thing too is you got to take in consideration that some countries offer universal health care. Right, and so you can become an expatriate and move to another country at 55, and after a certain amount of time be under their healthcare system.
Right.
So there are different ways, if you want to look outside the box, all kinds of different ways to do these things.
Yeah, and then the other versions are just similar. They're just all, again, it's trying to sort of get individualistic with each of these approaches. Like what works for you, what timing works for you, and for most of us, and most of the time when we sit down with somebody, that's really where the issue comes in, is they're not really a clear, defined, I want to retire at this point.
Well, the thing I really like about the FIRE movement is that it is out of the box. It lets people think about, if I could do anything I wanted to do, what would I do and how would I do it? And because we get so molded, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to graduate from school. I'm going to get married, have kids, buy a house. I'm going to retire. The grandkids are going to come over. I'm going to be in the same house. So it does. It's this whole predefined way that things are going to happen. FIRE says I'm breaking that mold, and I'm going to do it my own way, a different way. And so that I like about it is, when it comes to retirement, get outside of the box.
Yeah.
Right, experiences are important, and you want to live life on your terms. And I think that's what a lot of this stuff has given us lately.
Right, and I think that's a big part of, as we said from the beginning, for us with this, is that sort of balance, right? Because that's a big part that comes in here, because you've got to be figuring out, all right, I'm either living today and saving for tomorrow, or some version to that. And this FIRE really does sort of give that idea, that concept of I am doing what I want to do today, but I'm also going to do what I want to do in the future.
Absolutely, yes.
And that's really what this is about, and trying to sort of figure that in. Next one. So have a little fun with us, because we call this ARIES FIRE. So if you want to, you can go back. Again, I keep referencing this. It's very funny that it happens to tie in with no pension, no problem. But the idea and the concept here is, for us, it's about being more efficient with your withdrawal, right? About where the money is. And so what you're seeing there is two slides, right? In this case, we're dealing with the buffer strategy. So if I just had, Craig, $1 million sitting, that's my assets. I've got it in all sorts of money, right? And it's just there. and I am drawing 3.5%, which
Right.
is what the FIRE movement talks about. Everybody, so you read any economist, they'll tell you that's pretty much for retirement what you should be withdrawing. That means I'm living on
35 grand.
$35,000. My million is generating $35,000 a year for me. And here's the problem with that. For most retirees, that money is exposed to market volatility. And if the market happens to go down in a year, specifically in it's like 1 or 2 in the first 5 years of retirement.
Yep, it's a huge impact.
Right. So what happens there is if I had retired last year, 2022, the market went down, bonds went down, everything went down. There was no place to hide, right? Everything went down. If I had retired in that year and I started withdrawing my retirement income from my assets, I'm taking a double dip
Yes.
because the market dropped and then I withdrew my money. The actual way to do this and what ARIES FIRE is sort of trying to show in that is that what the idea is I want to have a separate bucket, a separate pool of money that is available to me that's not subject to market risk, interest rates, any of the other stuff.
It's secure.
It's secure. And so that's the concept that I am now able to generate usually somewhere between 30 to 50% more income.
Absolutely, and it's really just about efficient planning. And that's something that a lot of people don't do. Like I said, most of the time, advisors are worried about accumulation goals, not worried about distribution. And especially when it comes to early distribution, a lot of people just aren't experts in, I want to retire at 50, how do I make that happen?
Right.
I want to retire at 55 or 60, how do I make that happen? Because they're too worried about, well, you need a 30-year window for accumulation. So you've just shortened that window, and now you want more efficiency. So that's where we start talking about the ARIES FIRE and those concepts.
Right, and certainly, like we said, that if you do want any more information on this or any other type of planning like this, you can actually search out our other episode. It's called No Pension, No Problem, and it talks specifically about some of the problems, some of the inherent issues that happen with retirees in trying to generate that income stream in retirement or that cash flow that's there.
Absolutely, yep.
All right, next slide. Thank you. A checklist for considerations, right? So it says cut your expenses, like God bless, like everybody, that's the thing. But the FIRE folks, they take this to the nth degree when they talk about cutting your expenses. I mean, they mean move someplace else. They mean, like Craig talked about, go live someplace that's less expensive. Give up annual vacations. Cut down on a lot of that ancillary spending that goes on so that money can be put into to try to generate or create that passive or retirement income.
Right, like I said, depending on what you're trying to achieve, they believe that life is about experiences. It's really about the experience. And a lot of times what we find out is we try to buy experiences, right? We throw a lot of money at vacations. We throw a lot of money at, going out to eat, doing those types of things. Where in the FIRE movement, you're really saying, can I do these things on a budget? Like, didn't you just have a friend of yours who walked across Spain?
Yes.
Just walked across Spain. So that cost him what, a pair of shoes and an airplane ticket? I mean,
yes, for the most part. Stays at hostels, that type of thing, yeah.
Yeah, but that's quite an experience that
right.
If we had to spend a month in Spain, would be extremely expensive, right?
Oh yeah. No,
Yeah,
if I spent a day in Spain, it would be extremely expensive.
So that's what we're talking about.
Right. Right. They talk about increasing your income. That's, again, a lot of us can't do that unless we take on, a side hustle, a second job, a part-time, a gig or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's part of the FIRE movement. They will talk about, it's spare time isn't spare time. It's time that can be used to generate income.
Yeah, but the other part of that too is, sometimes you don't want to take on a side hustle. Like you have a job and you're trying to get by, and to think on another job and feel like I'm still treading water doesn't feel good. But when you take it on a goal, which is we love to talk about having a goal,
right?
And you're saying, well, this money, this side hustle is going towards that goal of allowing me to retire 5 years earlier. Then all of a sudden it doesn't seem so bad,
right?
Because you're going and doing it for a purpose.
Exactly. Next slide. Right. So again, the same idea here, right? Prioritize your savings, pay off your debt, because debt is going to drag everything down. So that's clearly the number one thing there with everything, which is eliminate the debt. So all the money should be going to paying down the debt. And savings. We talk about this all the time as far as prioritizing and making yourself the priority when it comes to saving. We're great at paying our bills. But we need to prioritize and make sure that once that mortgage, once the utilities, once that stuff gets paid, then you're paying you. Then we can talk about the discretionary, all the fun stuff. That comes after, right? But the priority has to be on savings. That's got to be the number one thing.
Yeah. Actually, because even like you said, in the barista style, I kind of like, because it's, maybe I'm just retiring from the high pressure job that I don't want to be in anymore.
Right, exactly.
Right? And so I can do the things I want to do, work where I want to work. It's not as important. Even if I still need a little income, that's okay, but I'm choosing the situation, I'm choosing the terms and the circumstances I'm doing it in. That's financial freedom, being able to do what you want, when you want.
Exactly, yes. Next slide. All right, so what could go wrong, right? So not
everything.
Right, so we'll go through the blocks as they're there, but right, so healthcare. We've talked about this over and over again, but so every retiree, regardless of what age, whether you're 65, whether you're 60 or 55, sort of predisposes that they're going to stay in the same health today, that they'll be at 75 or 80, and really hasn't prepared for what healthcare is going to cost later on. And that is something that if it's not factored in, derails a plan no matter how good it is.
Yeah, and I hear this all the time, the not me, somebody else.
Somebody else, right? That's
right.
hope. Hope is it's a plan, but let's face it, not really factual or built on anything that's going to work. The investment underperformance. That's another one. If we're calculating that I'm going to get whatever the number is, 6%, 7%, 8% a year, it doesn't matter what it is. If they underperform or we have several bad years, that's going to take it out. Like we just talked about, that whole investment risk volatility at a time when I'm withdrawing the money out seriously takes away, right? The distribution rate, if you're not targeting at 3 or 3.5%, well, suddenly I'm taking 5 or 6. Your money is not going to last, especially if a downturn occurs. So that could be a problem.
Yeah, if you get a 2 and a 3 at the same time, then you're really in.
Yeah, then you're really in problem, right? Right. One of the things there, number 4 talks about being able, like Craig said, maybe you can't save aggressively. Maybe you just can't put that much money away.
Right.
So the idea is that target of 60 or 62 or whatever has to be floated. It's got to get moved because of that. And then 5, we're in Massachusetts, so everybody sort of relates to taxes. Who knows where the tax rate's going to be? Who knows where they're going to go 15, 20 years from now? You sort of, we can only plan where we are today.
Yeah.
And then the last one there is that you just didn't consider everything, right? One of the things in the quick story with that is one of the principles, one of the people behind the whole FIRE movement has found that he had to make some changes and alterations because his kids needed to go to school. He's got to pay for college.
Kids.
But he wasn't, kids, right? Because he had kids. Now it's one of the things in the FIRE movement, they will talk about don't have kids. Don't have kids, don't have pets, don't have anything that's going to be an additional cost. That's something that you have to consider. That's up for everybody.
Well, it goes back to the original statement you made about if it causes stress or, then it's not part of the movement, right? So if having kids was your ultimate plan, then you need to build that into your plan. Right. If you really just want to be out as early as you possibly can, then that's an expense or lifestyle that you don't want. That's okay too. If you don't want to have children, don't have them.
All right, so why it works today, right? So, there's a lot on this slide. We're not going to go too deep in it, but the idea is that it really does get you to think about, certainly setting spending limits, adopting a better savings habit. That's one of the biggest things with it, right? Trying to be really aggressive with your savings, right? Retiring when you want to retire. We think that's the biggest thing, like Craig said. It's doing what you want to do and living when you want to live, right? And so it gets you to think about it, and then get you to really understand and think about living in retirement today. Because I think that's a big one for retirees, is this whole concept of I get to whatever it is, 65, 67, whatever, and I retire, and I never thought about what I was going to do in retirement.
Absolutely, because we're so used to working. You're so programmed. The last 40 years, I get up, I go to work, I come home.
Right.
I get up, I go to work, I come home. Now I get up,
I pick things up, I put them
down. Absolutely, right. And now I don't have to pick them up and put them down anymore. So now what do I do? But I also think you don't want to take it, you always want to have that balance. So you don't want to sacrifice everything today with a hope that you're going to have the future.
Right.
Right. It has to be a balance where you can have a good today and build a solid future for yourself with choices. That's what it really is about, having choices.
Right. So why it may not matter today, right? And Craig had touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the presentation. The whole idea is that we're in a hybrid workforce right now. So I understand everybody's trying to be driven back or forced back or whatever you want to say in terms of the...
Get back to the office.
Get back to the office. But the reality is that most employers out there are still in some form or fashion of a remote workplace. We are a gig economy, so there is all of this passive or other income that's being generated, and we have more and more because of virtual, because of online, because of all of these things, these less than traditional, like Craig said, that rat race and getting into the car and sitting in traffic type of thing. So it may not be that you need to get out at 55 or get out at 60. It may be I'm comfortable, and so I can continue what I'm doing, so long as you like what you're doing.
Yeah, that's the important thing. Yeah, you like what you're doing.
All right, so key takeaways, right? So to be thinking about retiring earlier, right? So you've got to have that mindset. You got to set yourself up for it. You got to stay on track, right? You got to, I know where I am. I know where I want to get to. Number 3 is develop better money habits. We talk to everybody about developing better money habits all the time, but it really needs to be that idea that I'm saving, I'm putting a savings plan in place, eliminating debt. For everybody, that should be the absolute number one thing to do, especially as we get coming, the pause button is going to come off on the student loans, all of that stuff coming up. But, none of this works without a plan. None of this works, like Craig said, we're always talking to people about goals.
That's right.
But you need to put a plan in place, and you need to find balance to do it. Next slide.
That's right, Master Sifu.
Right. So, listen, the QR code on the screen, you can pause it, shoot that QR code. That'll open up our calendar. We're happy to have a conversation with anybody. We're happy to answer any questions. The consultation is no cost. There's no obligation. You can always just reach out to us. See maybe if what we call ARIES F.I.R.E might work for you. And on that, we are going to say, have a good evening. Those are our contacts. You can reach out to us. Those are our social media channels and where we're at in terms of dealing with everything. But the email is info@ariesfoundation.org. Thank you.